So what we got three great recruiters here with a lot of experience from some companies, big and small. I'm going to introduce them real quick, and then we will start to get into some of the topics. So first on the far left over there, you're right, is Sarah Knapp. She's from a company called TechFlow. And Sarah, you've been recruiting for a bit, right?
22.
22 years. 22 years, and you've been at some more than one company, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, large and small.
Large and small. And the company you're with now, you consider more on the smaller side?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so that's Sarah. We'll be talking to her. We've got in the middle Ray Ryan, double R there. He's from General Dynamic Electric Boat, and you have not been recruiting for very long because you used to be an engineer, right? Or a developer?
I was in design.
Design. I'm sorry.
Mechanical design.
Yeah, it's all science to me.
I've done recruiting for the Air Force, for the U.S. Air Force, for about 8-9 years.
Yeah.
And I've been with General Dynamics Electric Boat in recruiting for just 6 months.
But your position there is as a military liaison recruiter too. So we're going to get it. We're going to ask some questions about the difference between a standard recruiter and a more military liaison type recruiter too. And then right here we've got Robin Wallace. Robin is from International Business Machines, also known as IBM. This is not your first go around with recruiting either, is it, Robin?
So I have been with IBM for over 30 years. Recruiting is actually my third career I've had at IBM. So I've been doing recruiting now for about 12 years, and prior to that was a consultant.
And you're not doing the day-to-day recruiting right now as much as you're leading a team of recruiters, right?
That is correct. I did the day-to-day recruiting, and then recently I joined management, and now manage about a team of 9 recruiters in the federal practice.
Okay, so cool. So we've met them. My name is Bob Wheeler. I've been at ClearedJobs.Net for 8 years now. Prior to this, I was in the Navy for 20 years. My last gig was recruiting doctors up in Maryland. That's how I got into the recruiting thing. I currently live down in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, but I come up here for these job fairs. And as we do this, we've met ourselves. The group that's out here now, just I want to learn more about you guys that's here. How many people out here in the group already are actively looking for a job? Like if one of these people offered you a job today, you could conceivably take it. Okay, so almost everybody here is in the active. Anybody here that's doing the more kicking the tires, about to get out of the service, something like that? Anybody like that? So I've got some folks who are just kind of kicking the tires things. How many people here are either are right now or just got out of the military? Anybody in the military service? So we got a few. Some people are even doing half and half hands type thing. Is another question I'd like to ask is anybody here? The job you're looking for, this is the first job that you've looked for since high school or college. Like a lot of times, military veterans. Yeah, it's not uncommon. This is the first time that you've looked for a job since high school or college. The first time you were doing that was to get in the service. The recruiting world is very different, the way that they treat you and what they're looking for. So that's exactly why we're going to really explore, what it's like. So some of the things that I want to start with is just like, what's it like, the recruiting process? Because I think a lot of job seekers don't. If you can understand the process, you can go with the flow. When I was working with the Marine Corps, we had to do martial arts, and one of the things I learned was if they push, you pull. If they pull, you push. Like that's how you kind of win the battle. So if we can understand how the recruiting world works as a job seeker, then you can, like I said, you can go with the flow. So there's different things. There's things like sourcing, there's recruiting, and there's hiring. So sourcing means they go out and they look for people, right? They're just looking for people. Recruiting is the day-to-day, like, hey, have you thought about this job? Let me help you with this job. And then the hiring, now you start getting into something called the hiring manager, and we're going to talk about that person. But that's the person that makes the decision about I want to hire her or I don't want to hire her. So those are the people. So it's going to start here, and I'm going to start with Sarah, and then we're going to Robin, and you last. So when we talk about what we call requisitions, a recruiter has so many recs, how many open positions they're filling. How many, on a typical thing, how many requisitions do you or your recruiters have? And in that thing, how many hiring managers does that recruiter support?
Sure, it varies. So right now I'm at a smaller organization, and our recruiters are running on average about 10 funded, and then they'll often have, maybe another 10 or 15 that are, contingent things that we're preparing for the future. That is a little bit of a lower rec load, comparably speaking to some larger organizations. But we don't do as much volume of, hiring 5 systems administrators or 5 software developers. We're a lot more, single type positions, so that can be a little bit harder to manage the higher volumes there.
So, and what about a bigger company? The recruiters that work for you, what's their workload look like, and how many managers do they report to for that?
So we're probably the opposite of Sarah. I would say typically it's about 20 to 25 positions that they recruit for, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to a requisition. So somebody could only have 2 requisitions, but they need to hire 10 people on each one, and it could be 10 software developers or Java developers, or they could have 20 requisitions and they're all different skills. The number of hiring managers, sometimes it really depends on whether or not that person is trying to hire all of those roles for one particular project, and then it's just one hiring manager, or if their roles span projects, then they do typically deal on a day-to-day basis with multiple hiring managers.
Yeah, so those hiring managers, remember when we think about the hiring manager, that person is super busy doing other things. The reason, and they're super busy because they don't have enough people to do the regular job, which is why they're trying to hire more people. So Ray, your job as a military veteran recruiter liaison guy there at Electric Boat, General Dynamics Electric Boat, you don't have specific recs then, do you?
I personally don't have recs.
Yeah.
I'm the only staffing representative that doesn't have recs.
Okay. So can you explain what do you know about the Electric Boat, like what the typical recruiter actually has?
I do. So
Sure.
usually it's between 80 and some have 200.
Wow.
Some of those recs they stay open because the job need, like engineering, entry-level engineers always stay open. System tests, they need to constantly hire. So their staffing role of the Electric Boat is very crazy and hectic.
And so the reason I ask about how many different hiring managers that people deal with is because, let me tell you a secret about hiring. The most important thing, the most important factor in an organization having a good hiring process is the relationship between the recruiters and the hiring managers. I think almost people would almost always say that. If it's not the number one thing, it's right up there. But it's because they work with different hiring managers. Sometimes it can be the same recruiter might have 5 different relationships with 5 different people. And we've all had that in our lives, right? Where this process is working great and this process is going a lot slower. So sometimes we think to the recruiter, like, what's going on? You want to share anything about, we'll start with Robin, like as far as that relationship, what is it, in your experience, what have you seen make it work well? And is there anything that makes it just, for no fault of the job seeker, just make it not work as well?
I would say what really makes it work well is to establish at the beginning, what kind of communication you're going to have with the hiring managers. So you're going to set up a weekly call, status call. Are you going to text each other? Are you going to Slack each other? Are you going to, is email the best form of communication? But once you figure out what the best form of communication is, then you can work on that relationship and make sure you keep in touch with that hiring manager. Because what you'll find is you'll have some hiring managers who they need to hire somebody yesterday, and they'll be calling you and emailing you all the time, and then you'll have other hiring managers who say they wanted to hire somebody yesterday, but you can't get in touch with them. So really establishing that form of communication with them and setting expectations up front, because ultimately the recruiter wants to get back to the candidate in a reasonable manner, but if they're not getting answers from the hiring manager, then they're not able to give answers to the candidate.
And that can be on your end then of like, my recruiter just doesn't want to get back to me. And sometimes you might think that, well, he or she is just a lousy recruiter, when sometimes it just could be that the hiring manager hasn't got it. The hiring manager might be on vacation. Somebody else could be on vacation. Or like we said, the hiring manager is so busy and the last thing on their mind is actually trying to do the hiring because they're too busy on the shop floor doing stuff. So that's at a bigger company. Did you have the same thing, Sarah, at the smaller companies, or does it vary a little bit?
No, I mean, I feel like communication with the hiring manager and the recruiter is the most key thing between communication and making sure that you're on the same page as far as priority level. When everyone is on the same page and we're able to respond quickly, I mean, that is where you're going to have the most success. But, we do, any company I've worked at, we've always run into situations where, same thing, there's, sometimes managers that are ready to go, that are available, other times managers might not be available. And sometimes it can be things, behind the scenes that at least if the manager's communicating, we can keep the lines of communication open to the candidate. For example, if, maybe the hiring manager can't make a decision on a resume, pending feedback from a client or customer or something like that. And as long as we have that information, we're able to share it with the candidate. It goes a long way for recruiters to be able to keep candidates warm when a process is taking longer.
Okay. So feel free to jump on this too, Ray, but I'm going to ask you a different question too. But if you want to add to what we just talked about, feel free to as well. I want to talk also with something else that goes into a good hiring process that can be outside of the job seeker's control is job descriptions. Some job descriptions are written very well. Some job descriptions are not written very well. Sometimes it's the fault of the organization. Sometimes it's not the fault of the organization. But a good job description can make your life easier. So from your perspective as a military liaison guy, I think you do a lot of talking to people who are new to the hiring process. Did you ever talk about the job descriptions and how they can look at those things?
I do, and it can be very confusing sometimes with the job description and how someone's skills can transfer over, especially with the military. I deal a lot with the military. Sometimes it's hard to find that filter on where your skill sets are going to transition, and you might not see that in the job description because they can be very confusing.
When you talk about when you're a recruiter if you've got some ideas, think about, raise your hand, we'll take some questions in a bit. But TechFlow, it's an interesting thing about, you talk about software type stuff, but I want to pull a string on you a little bit, because I know TechFlow does things that are not always just software development, which we see a lot of stuff. You guys are hiring for like sometimes HVAC people. You were mentioning to me that you look fire alarm technicians.
Yes.
And in places like, not even in the DC area. And a lot of times folks that come out of the service have this question like, how is that different? Because you've also recruited for the technical things in your past. What's the difference between like those the wrench turner jobs, say, versus the
Sure.
software developed keystroking jobs?
Sure. Some of it is comes down to the tools where we advertise. We find that Indeed we have much more success with candidates looking for HVAC type roles, the fire alarm technicians, plumbers, things like that. We also do a lot more networking to those on the local site, trying to get referrals from the team. Whereas if I'm looking for an enterprise architect, I'm probably going to go to LinkedIn along with some of the like ClearedJobs and some of the other sources that I'm looking at.
And Ray, we'll talk to you. I know at Electric Boat, you got a lot of wrench turners there too.
We do.
And one thing I talked to Sarah about, unless you kind of answer this, you've got jobs in places other than the DC area.
We do. We have jobs all over the country.
And what's it like when you're trying to recruit those folks? What should job seekers, if they're living in a place, that they're looking at a job and they say, well, it's in Groton, Connecticut, for example. Is there something that a job seeker that's in Northern Virginia or something that they're in Florida because they're still on active duty? Like, how should they approach that to make it go easier? Is there any tips on those?
Well, most likely they're going to have to come to start in Groton. Unfortunately, they come there, they get their clearance, they would get employed there, and then go out to the other shipyards where they are maintaining the submarine. So,
but that's got to be tougher to recruit for some tougher geographic locations.
It is tougher. It is.
Yeah. And that kind of brings up something, and I'm going to tangent that into a different question for Robin. There's a difference when you're a job seeker between you, and we need to understand as job seekers. Do I have a certain set of skills that not very many people has? Or do I have a set of skills that everybody needs, and so those recruiters are wading through 100 resumes to fill the one position? So that what I'm saying, the difference between the tough to find versus I've got lots of people. What's that like for the recruiter? Do they get those different types of recs? I mean, it's a whole different work day, isn't it?
Yeah, so the ones that are easy to find, we get a lot of what we call organic pipelines. So people will apply directly through our IBM career website. And that's where we might get hundreds of resumes where, as I said, the recruiter's going to go through those really quickly and look for those keywords to kind of fish people out, as opposed to what we call finding the purple squirrel is what we like to call it. And in that case, we are looking at places like LinkedIn, ClearedJobs, places like that to find folks. And especially, for us, we also do have jobs all across the U.S. Sometimes you do have to be on site in D.C. or a specific location with a big project going down in Radford, Virginia. We also have a lot of work going on in Rocket Center, West Virginia. So those are places that are really hard to find people. So then we might target certain organizations down in those areas to try to find people, or do a career fair or something like that down there.
And as a proud graduate of Radford University, I'll put a plug in for Radford, Virginia. That's a Brandy Brewer down there. But that's a big thing. Like I said, if you're coming out of the service, sometimes we don't really understand, like, why is it going one way for one person or another way for another person? If we understand our skill sets or the job that you're applying for, sometimes you really want to know, like, am I in this giant pile of lots of people that they've got to wade through, or am I something? Why did this person somebody just reached out on LinkedIn or just made a phone call because they found their resume on ClearedJobs.Net, like, hey, do you want to work for General Dynamics Electric Boat? I've never even thought about it, But other people are like, no one's calling them because they're getting, like she said, hundreds of resumes that come through. And Sarah, you've been doing this for a long time too. So when you get all those resumes, and usually the biggest problem is that most of them are actually not qualified, right? You're wading through the unqualified people. So what can a job seeker do? Is it that bad to just spray and pray? Like, what does it do if you apply to 12 different jobs to the same company on the same day? Can you guys see that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can see that. Absolutely.
You see it every day. The person that just applied for 15 jobs and qualified for 2. And all you're doing is wasting time.
Yeah.
As an applicant, really, if you're not hitting that required field, don't bother applying for it. Make sure that you hit those requirements. Most of the time, you want a lot of those preferreds in there as well to make sure that it's highlighted on your resume. Easy to see.
All right, so we're going to go some questions that we have more folks have shown up. So does anybody have any questions that they want to ask of just the panel in general or anything like that? They had something way in the back there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of.
Oh, and by the way, some people just walked in. We are recording, so you don't want to throw your name out there, your clearance level, nothing like that, or where you're working, because we are recording this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just kind of wondering, what do you think about cover letters? Are they useful to hiring manager and recruiters?
So cover letter, that's a great question, and what I'm going to do, because this is one of those things I think it can vary a little bit, and it might also vary by the time of over the years. So we're just going to go left to right, or right to left, and we'll start that this way. So just, what do you guys think? I mean, is it?
So I personally prefer the intro paragraph to the cover letter. But I will say for more senior level, very specific skill sets, there can be times when a cover letter might be helpful to capture a significant amount of information. But I will, if we're talking a more junior level position, I probably would take the time to do it.
Anything to add, Rick?
I would say if you're going for a semi-skilled or skilled position, you don't know cover letter needed. It won't ever get looked at. If I'm going for a more senior position, I always read the cover letter. I feel it kind of gets me to know that applicant a little better. That's just my preference.
Anything to add, Rick?
So kind of the opposite, I never read the cover letter. I must always skip it. I like the introductory paragraph. Tell me what you're going to tell me on the first page. I'm not going to read the cover letter. I find that our junior level candidates are the ones that write the cover letters because that's what they learn out of college. In college, they learn how to write a cover letter and then how to write a resume. So I tend to see more cover letters coming right out of college, which I think is, I actually like that because it shows more initiative, that they're really trying to get the job. They might not have a lot of stuff on the resume, but they might have a lot of stuff to tell you in a cover letter.
Do you think it ever happens that writing a cover letter is a detractor, or is it at worst just a it didn't make no difference at all?
I don't think it's a detractor.
Yeah, unless it's not well written.
Yeah. So I guess that's one thing I want to bring out is if you write a really, really bad cover letter to where it's like looks even bad, that can be a bad thing. But if you write a cover letter that's never read, if there's a misspelling in it, they never read it, they never know there's a misspelling. But from the cover letter piece, I always tell people, think about, is there a reason for the cover letter? Sometimes if you're coming out of the service and you're applying for a position that's in Northern Virginia, but you're, let me tell you why I'm in Bangor, Washington right now. I'm getting out of the service. I grew up in this area. I can't wait to get back to this area. Like, you know what you're getting into if you have a story. But the other thing is, this is where we go back to talking to recruiters, is you say, hey, is it worth it? Like, does your hiring manager want to see anything? Is there anything I should say? If the recruiter says, no, don't worry about it, then don't worry about it. But sometimes a recruiter might say, you know what? Actually, Bill, the program manager, he's one of those weird dudes who just loves cover letters. You know, they will tell you that because it's their job to know those relationships.
And that's why it's very important to find the recruiters for a company that you want.
They're traffic directors. They kind of know the way. More questions, or is there something else? Is there somebody else that had a question? Right there, yeah.
Question about resumes. Flashy and attention grabbing, boring and standard. And then along with that, kind of picked up from you guys, intro paragraph, key skills, reverse chronology of work, education. Is that correct? And then anything further after that?
I would say standard. I personally like standard. The flashy stuff, I can't stand it. When people have a picture of them and their dog on the resume, why? It makes no sense. And you're having someone judge you off that. I would never do that. People do all the time though. And I think, like what you said with the chronological order, I think that's the right path to go.
Anybody else want to add?
I would agree. Definitely do not put your picture on your resume. And I always tell people, don't put dates when you graduate college or high school or anything like that, no dates. So that way it's your resume, it's who you are, no picture.
One of the things, and the reason they're bringing this up too, is one of the things, and the bigger the company, the more this is important, but it's important for everybody. Human resources laws are out there, they're real. And if you're doing government contract, you've got what they call OFCCP, but what you guys want to know is there's lots of things that they don't ever want to be put in a position where they say, I didn't hire that person because they looked like this, because I thought they were old. Even if they didn't hire you because you seriously just didn't meet the qualifications, but now there's something that says, well, now you didn't hire me because, So yeah, the dates pieces. When you think about your resume, that reverse chronological, just think to yourself, what you did recently is the most important. Well, what have you done for me lately? And if you have experience using a tool, but you haven't used it in 10 years, that's not going to be the same as if you have experience using it last year. Like she had said, I think it was you said, they look at that first job that you're doing right now, is really the most important. And how many folks again here coming out of the military or transition veterans again? You know, good number. This can be a challenge for folks coming out of the service, because what if your last command, you were teaching at a schoolhouse or you were recruiting, but you weren't doing whatever it is you're trained to do. So you haven't touched that tool or that thing for 4 years. I mean, let's start with Ray, and then we'll get the other two to jump in on that. Like from a military perspective, what should people do when they've got that situation? Is there anything they can do?
My best, I always say, and I tell a lot of the transitioning service members, don't even apply to the rec until I look at your resume. Get in our system, let me look at your resume, let me look at the hiring manager that you want to go with. Now you know the hiring managers, you realize what they like, what they don't like, and always, I tell every transitioning service member, come to me, let's discuss it, let's set a time to meet, talk, let's set up a meeting, and I help them from there through the whole process.
And so even if it's not military transition, I think one of the other common questions we get, we'll let Sarah and Robin answer this, is when those folks say, well, I've got the education but not the skills, like if you're maybe entry level type stuff, I've got my certs, but I haven't done it. Like is there any tips for folks that are in that situation?
Sure. So sometimes, it can depend on the organization and the position, but a lot of times we are bound by contractual requirements and, government contracting industry. So there might not really be anything that we could do at this point if you don't meet the minimum requirements. But for entry level candidates that maybe have the degree or something like that, I do talk to candidates about what is your project-based, coursework. Have you done internships? Is there anything that you have done that is remotely relevant that you could, attribute towards that specific skill set? And then the other thing is, if you're really trying to get into an industry, what can you volunteer to get, this specific experience, or, any way that you can get that experience while you're kind of working still in your current job.
And Sarah, Robin, IBM, you're no secret, it's a big name company. I imagine you probably have lots of people who just want to work for them. The new job, oh my God, I can work for IBM. I imagine you get some people who are in that position, like they really want to get that, so they have maybe the search but not the skills yet. Does your recruiting team see that a lot?
We do, and we partner with some companies that try to place veterans as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll work with that particular company, bring somebody in who might, as you said, has the education but not the skills, and train them. Put them through a training program, or put them through a training program while they're currently with their organization, and then bring them over to IBM when they're ready. So we have certain programs like that. Or we do have a lot of junior positions. So maybe you are very senior in the military, but you're kind of switching gears, coming in at a more junior level position and working your way up is also a way to go as well.
All right, so we've only got about 5 more minutes, because at 1:45, I'm going to let these three get out, because they've got to get to their booths, because they're here to hire people. A question back there real quick?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you something specifically about what you talked about. If I were a senior in certain work with the federal government as a contractor, yet I may need to go and volunteer for a place to learn more about administration part of certain jobs. Like I've had experience in administration, but it's been a while. So where would you suggest that I should start? Is it the federal government? Can I go as not as a contractor, but as a volunteer? If they even let me in.
No, so I think, I don't know, could we?
That might be one we take offline.
Yeah, I might need a little bit more information, but I'm sure we could come up with something. Administration is so broad, so I'm kind of having a hard time figuring out where exactly, but I'd be happy to talk with you in more detail.
And I'm gonna stick around after that. At 1:45, we've got to let these three get to their booths, because that's what they're here for. So if we have a really quick question, we can.
Yes, really quick. Two really quick questions. Okay, so I am also transitioning from business side of media to cybersecurity, and I'm applying for entry-level to mid-level positions. And I'm seeing this 5 to 8 years experience requirements for entry-level. So, what do you think about that? And another thing, I'm new to clearance world, so let's say I have public trust clearance. How feasible for me to apply for secret clearance jobs?
That's a great question. If we can take that one first, people that are looking for that, a lot of times you'll see must be willing to obtain a clearance or eligible to obtain. People moving up in clearances, any quick tips on that?
I mean, I think that's the key to look for those, because a lot of times the organization might not have the flexibility to, like, they might have to find somebody that has that clearance already, but occasionally there will be positions where they can hire people that are eligible and put them through the process. So you just want to make sure that you're looking at the postings and trying to find the ones that are willing to sponsor you for the required clearance versus the ones that are requiring that you have to have it already.
And I can expand them, but then when we let these guys go, I'll stick around and I'll keep answering questions, by the way.
And it's the same at IBM as what Sarah just described, it's the same.
Yeah, at electrical, it's the same thing too. As long as you can obtain it and you get into that position that they need that clearance, they'll get the process going.
So before we let these folks go, you guys are at job fairs, which is great. That's why you're here to hire and to meet people. Any tips for job seekers on when they talk to recruiters? Should they reach out to you guys on LinkedIn? How do they follow up from things? What's the right way to do things without being creepy or something like that? You know, I mean, what's the appropriate professional way to follow up?
Well, I think email always works. And then I guess it depends on the kind of relationship. Once you've talked to the recruiter, and they may say to you, hey, you know, I'll text you when I have an answer if you like to be texted. But I would say email for sure. All recruiters read their email all day. Is probably the best way. And I mean, kind of what Ray said earlier, I mean, you don't want to be a pest about it, but it's your career. And if you really want the job, follow up. The recruiter will appreciate the fact that you're very interested and that you really want the job and you want to talk to more people or you want to give references or whatever it is you want to do. And the recruiter will know that you mean serious business. And also be honest. If you have other job offers, if you're interviewing with other companies, let the recruiter know that because they may say, oh, I better hurry up and get this guy or gal a job or I'm going to lose them. So just be honest with, kind of where you are in the process.
Right.
I personally like to set up meetings and talk and get on that and hear your voice and get a feel for that personality of the applicant. I encourage them to call me before the day before their interview or whatever, so I can look up, see who that hiring manager is, give them tips on what to do, what not to do, what they want to see. A lot of times you want to be enthusiastic to join the team. They like that. So I do everything on a phone call, and you're really not a pest as long as you're not the person that's like, hey, I just applied for this position. What about what's going on here? Like you applied yesterday. Like give me a couple weeks and then give me a call.
Sarah?
Yeah, and I appreciate the follow-up too. If you find an organization that you really want to be part of, even if there's not an opening that's an exact match for you today, make the connection with the recruiter. And I love it when candidates follow up. It takes 2 seconds out of my day, and that is something that we can share with the hiring manager to be like, hey, this guy's been calling me for 3 months. Look, we finally have something. He really wants to join the organization. I think that says a lot when candidates do that.
All right, Sarah, Ray, Robin, we all appreciate your time for coming in early and just answering some questions and giving us a little bit of behind the scenes on what the hiring thing's like. So if you guys want to go ahead and get back and get ready to talk to people for real and talk about your organization.